The morning my own daughter told me I was too old to run my own business was the same morning I found out she'd already changed the locks. "Mama, you should be resting," she said, her tone soft but sharp underneath. "You've done enough. Let me handle the bakery now." I stood there in my apron, holding a tray of fresh sweet potato rolls, realizing I couldn't even unlock the front door of the place I'd built with my own hands. If you've ever started over late in life, or had someone you love try to take what you earned, go ahead and like and subscribe, because this one's for us. My name is Lorraine Jacobs. I'm 63 years old, born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. I spent most of my life working as a cafeteria manager for the public school district. For 38 years, I woke up before dawn, cooked for other people's children, and dreamed of owning a place that smelled like cinnamon, brown sugar, and butter instead of bleach and dish soap. When I finally retired, I took what little I'd saved, about $22,000, and invested every penny into a dream. Lorraine's Hearth opened its doors 2 years ago in a tiny brick storefront off Avenue D. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The first day, I baked 200 cookies and sold 170 by noon. People came for the pies, but they stayed for my smile, or at least that's what they told me. My daughter, Monique, was the first person I hired. She was 35 then, smart, charming, and good with social media. "Mama will make this viral," she said, showing me videos of other Black-owned bakeries getting thousands of followers. I was proud. Lord, I was proud. For a moment, I thought we were building something together, but pride, I've learned, can blind you quicker than love. It started small. Monique began handling the cash register, then the supplier invoices, then the bank deposits. "Let me do this, Mama," she'd say. "You need to focus on baking, not paperwork." And I let her. I let her because I wanted her to feel trusted, to feel capable. I told myself that one day she'd take over, when I was ready. But ready never came. One Sunday evening, I stayed late after closing, cleaning the counters and tallying sales. That's when I noticed something strange. The bakery's utility bill was addressed to Monique Jacobs Enterprises, LLC. I laughed at first, thinking maybe she'd made a mistake filling out an online form. But when I asked her about it the next morning, her eyes flicked away just for a second before she smiled. "Oh, Mama, that's just for tax reasons. Don't worry about it." I wanted to believe her, so I did. For a while. A month later, one of my regular suppliers, Mr. Walker from the produce market, called and asked, "Miss Lorraine, should we still be billing your daughter's company or switch it back to you?" My heart froze. I didn't even know it had been switched in the first place. That night, I went digging through the filing cabinet in the back office. The papers were neatly arranged, too neatly. I found new invoices, bank statements, and something else, an official document from the county clerk's office. Change of ownership. Lorraine's Hearth Bakery now registered under Monique Jacobs. My name had been crossed out in black ink. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the page. The words blurred. My own daughter had signed my bakery away, without telling me. I remember whispering, "Lord, what did I do wrong raising her?" When I confronted her the next morning, she didn't even deny it. She just folded her arms and said, "You wouldn't understand how business works, Mama. You'd run it into the ground if I didn't step in. This is for your own good." That phrase, "for your own good," it stung more than any slap, because it sounded like concern, but it was control dressed up as love. That night, I drove home, parked in front of my little house, and sat in the dark. I looked at my hands, floured, calloused, trembling. Those same hands had built everything she now claimed. And somewhere between heartbreak and disbelief, a quiet fire started to rise in me. If she thought I was too old to fight, she hadn't met the woman who used to wake at 4 every morning for 40 years and still smile at the children who threw their food on the floor. I might have been tired, but I wasn't done. I poured myself a cup of tea, took out my old spiral notebook, the one I used to track every recipe and expense, and wrote on the first blank page, Day 1, Taking Back What's Mine. I didn't know how yet, but I knew I would. And just as I closed that notebook, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Ms. Jacobs, this is the Jefferson County Registrar. We need to confirm your signature on a business transfer form. I froze because I hadn't signed anything. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with the spiral notebook open, my pen tapping at the margin until the rhythm steadied my breath. If part 1 of my life was building, part 2 was counting. I wrote out a ledger the way I used to teach my cafeteria staff to close a shift. No feelings, just facts. On the first line, opening day, Lorraine's Hearth, gross receipts, roughly $1,400. That was 2 summers back, late June, when the heat made the sidewalks shine. I had put down the last of my retirement, a little more than $22,000, to sign a simple month-to-month lease on the brick storefront, buy a second-hand Hobart mixer, 2 used display cases, and a refurbished point-of-sale terminal. I kept every receipt in a biscuit tin under my bed, labeled with masking tape, seed money. I wrote a second line. Merchant account opened, Lorraine A. Jacobs, sole proprietor, routing ending in 111. I remembered the bank officer, Mr. Benton, adjusting his glasses while he typed my details. You will want to file for an EIN, he had said. And I did. Employer identification number came in a thin IRS letter 2 weeks later, folded neat as a church bulletin. For the first year, I filed a Schedule C with my taxes, and I paid state sales tax monthly, walking the envelope over to the county office because I did not trust sending money by a website I could not see. Monique came in right after those first holidays, when the orders outgrew my capacity to carry flour by myself. She took over our Instagram, took glossy photos of pecan pies with the light slanting just so, and she captioned them with little hearts that made customers feel like family. Mama, we should form an LLC, she said one evening, washing sheet pans. Everyone I follow has one. I told her a sole proprietorship was fine for now. Later, I said, when we can afford a lawyer to set it up right. She kissed my cheek and said, for your own good, we should do it sooner. And I took it as concern, not a rehearsal. I kept counting. Month by month, I wrote down what we took in and what went out. January of last year, gross around $9,000 after expenses. February a little less, but steady. March bloomed with church orders for homecomings. Sheet cakes cut into tidy squares, the edges piped firm and proud. We opened at 7 most mornings. I arrived at 5, and Monique drifted in around 8 with a latte in her hand and a new idea for content in her phone. You do not have to keep every paper, Mama. She laughed when she saw the biscuit tin. We live in the cloud now. Still, I kept them. Each receipt smudged with flour and my thumbprint. The changes were subtle, so soft I mistook them for help. First, she moved our utilities to auto-pay to simplify, she said. Then she switched our coffee supplier to one of her partners. She told me the lease needed updating because the landlord was very particular, and she took the paper home to scan. I did not see it again. A week later, she came in with a new key. The locksmith said the old lock was sticky. I took care of it. I thanked her. "You think I am helpless?" I joked. "No," she said, smiling. "I think you are tired." When the county registrar texted about a signature, I scrolled back through months of little mercies and heard a hinge creak. I brewed a cup of tea so strong it bit my tongue and went to the desk drawer where I kept my passport, social security card, and the small velvet ring box my mother left me. Inside the box was her wedding band, thin gold worn smooth by time. I used to rub it when the ovens misbehaved and the receipts did not cover the flour. I slipped it onto my pinky, a habit, a talisman, and opened my notebook to a clean page. "Audit," I wrote. "Start at the bank." Before dawn, I pulled the last 3 months of bank statements from the biscuit tin and lined them up beside my notebook. Deposits looked normal at first. Daily card batches, small cash drops, but 2 new transfers appeared with a description I did not recognize. MJE Operating Sweep. MJE. My fingers went cold. I had seen those letters on the utility bill. Monique Jacobs Enterprises, LLC. The amounts were regular every Friday. 300 here, 500 there, around 1,000 at month end. Cash management, she would say. I could already hear it. But cash management for whose cash? I checked the point of sale settings on my tablet. The account owner's email had changed from mine to a generic address with Monique's initials. The deposit bank remained mine. At least that is what the screen claimed, but the settlement rules had a new line enabling those Friday sweeps to a linked account with the last 3 digits I did not recognize. I scrolled through the access log. Someone had enabled 2-factor authentication last month and directed the texts to a number ending in 759, Monique's number. By mid-morning, I drove to the bakery anyway, out of routine, if not out of hope. I stood on the sidewalk peering through my own front window, into my ovens, my aprons, my flour danced into air by the first flick of a new day, and I tried my key out of foolishness. The lock smiled politely and did not budge. Inside, I saw Monique roll a tray into the warmer. I knocked. She glanced up, then looked past me as if I were a fan at the glass of a fish tank. After a pause, she came to the door, cracked it just enough that our breath mingled and then parted. "Mama, I am in the middle of prep." Her tone was managerial, the way I used to speak to substitute workers who showed up late. "We will talk tonight." "No," I said. The word surprised me. It sounded simple. "We will talk now. Who is MJE?" Her jaw shifted. "It is our entity, Mama. For taxes. I told you. It protects you." "Then show me the papers," I said. "My signature. My name. Show me where I agreed." Her eyes slid, that quick flicker that used to preview a fib when she was 10 and wanted cookie dough for dinner. "You signed, Mama. You just do not remember. That is why I do these things for your own good." I stepped back as if the words had a hand. A customer behind me cleared his throat, and Monique widened the door, smile polished. "Come on in, sir, we are open," she sang, and the door swung between us like a metronome of 2 different lives. I turned away with my cheeks hot and my mother's ring cutting into my finger where I had curled my hand. Back home, I called the number from the registrar's text. A woman named Ms. Talley answered, her voice all business softened by the fatigue of being understaffed. "Ma'am, we have a transfer document for Lore," she checked. Lorraine's Hearth Bakery to an LLC called MJE. It is a certificate of trade name assignment attached to an assumption of assets form. We just need to confirm the owner's signature. I did not sign anything, I said. Can you tell me the notary's name? She exhaled. I can tell you the notary stamp reads Bradley Knox, and the date is late August. It lists your driver's license as identification. I did not show anyone my license in August, I said. I could hear my voice getting thin, and I pressed my palm flat on the table until the wood calmed me. Can I see a copy? You can come down and request it, she said. Bring your ID. If there is a problem with the signature, you can file an affidavit of forgery. There is a form. After we hung up, I wrote, August, fake notary, affidavit of forgery, ask for form. On the next line, I wrote, two-factor, POS locked to Monique's phone. Then, bank, Friday sweeps, MJE. Beside each, I drew a square to check later, the way I used to check that ovens were off before I locked the school kitchen and turned out the lights. I called Mr. Walker, my produce man. You still got my account under Monique's name? He cleared his throat. Ms. Lorraine, I was told she took over the business, so we updated our records. She said you were retiring. I did not, I said. The silence that followed had the weight of two people calculating truth. He finally said, If you need copies of purchase orders or the change request, I can print them. They are signed on file. Send them, I said, please. By late afternoon, my table was a paper field. Bank statements, point-of-sale screens printed and taped into the notebook. A hand-drawn diagram of our accounts like a spider web with my name fading at the edges and hers bold at the center. It felt like I was mapping a small theft repeated so many times it looked lawful. My mother's ring kept me from chewing my finger raw. I rubbed it and told myself out loud, count it all. I listed every place ownership lives in the world of a small shop, the lease, the utility accounts, the business license, the state sales tax permit, the bank accounts, the merchant processor, the domain name for our website, the social media handles, even the Google listing that tells the hungry where to park. I circled the ones that could be changed with an email in a bold tone. Most of them, it turned out. My sister called to check on me. You want me to come sit? She asked. I could hear her knitting needles clicking. No, I said. I need quiet to think. She hummed approval. Do not go over there raising your pressure, she said. Count first, then act. That night, a new email arrived from supportregisteral.gov, attaching a scanned assignment of trade name. The signature that claimed to be mine looked almost right. Looped L, a strong J, but the slope of the R was wrong, and my middle initial wandered like it was guessing. Under the notary stamp, a blurred rectangle where a photo ID should have been made, my stomach pitched. If this was a performance, it was brazen. If it was a mistake, it was one no one expected me to catch. I poured another cup of tea and wrote a vow at the bottom of the page. I will not sign away my life in silence. Then I wrote what to do, step by step, like a recipe. Step 1. Freeze the outflow. Call the bank. Request a temporary hold on transfers to any linked accounts not authorized by me. Step 2. Reset the point-of-sale ownership with the original EIN letter and my driver's license, in person if needed. Step 3. Walk into the county office, pull the original file, and complete an affidavit challenging the signature. Step 4. Landlord. Demand a copy of the current lease and list of approved key holders. Step 5. Document every conversation, date, time, name. I underlined the last sentence. Paper is patient, but paper also testifies. I closed my notebook and placed the velvet ring box on top of it like a paperweight. In the quiet, I could hear the clock in the living room counting out my resolve. I imagined Monique's face when I asked for copies. Imagined the way she would tilt her head and say gently, "Mama, do not make this harder than it has to be. It is for your own good." That phrase would be my metronome, the lie I would hear and answer with facts. Somewhere after midnight, I rose, ironed a clean blouse, and tucked my EIN letter, my original business license, and my driver's license into a manila folder. I wrote a list of offices with their addresses: our bank on 20th Street, the county registrar 2 blocks over, the landlord's agent across from the rotunda. I laid out my good flats because a woman walks different when she is going to get her name back. When the first light came, I locked my front door behind me, breathed the chill, and set off toward 20th Street with my spiral notebook under my arm and my mother's ring steady on my finger, ready to speak plainly to the first teller I met and ask for what was mine, even if the request set the day on fire. By the time the sun climbed over the red brick of 20th Street, I was already standing at the bank doors, clutching my manila folder like a shield. The guard nodded when he saw me. He knew me by now. "Morning, Miss Jacobs," he said. "You're here early." I smiled back the way Southern women do when they're holding more than they're ready to say. "Just need to check on a few things, baby," I told him. Inside, the lobby smelled of coffee and printer toner. My shoes clicked across the tile as I headed straight to the counter. "Is Mr. Benton in?" I asked. The teller glanced toward the glass offices, then buzzed him. A few minutes later, he appeared. Same neat tie, same polite smile. "Ms. Jacobs, how's the bakery?" I took a slow breath. That's what I'm here about. We sat in his office, and I laid out my documents one by one: my original account agreement, the merchant processing forms, the letter from the registrar, and the screenshots from my tablet showing those Friday transfers. Someone's been moving money from this account to another one under the name MJE, I said, keeping my tone even. I never approved it. Mr. Benton adjusted his glasses. "All right," he said. "Let's take a look." He clicked through the system while I rubbed my mother's ring with my thumb under the table, a small ritual to steady my hands. After a few minutes, he frowned. "Well, I do see those sweeps," he said slowly. "They're automated to an external business account. Same bank, different branch. It was linked 3 months ago." "By who?" I asked. He squinted at the screen. It says, "Authorized by account owner, verified through text confirmation to number ending in 759. That was Monique's phone. "I'm the account owner," I said firmly, "and that's not my number. I need those transfers stopped immediately." He nodded, fingers flying over the keyboard. "We can freeze external sweeps today," he said, "but to reestablish full control, you'll need to fill out a fraud affidavit and provide identification. Once that's processed, we can restrict digital access and issue new credentials." I slid my driver's license across the desk and signed where he pointed. "How much total has been moved?" I asked. He calculated quietly, then said, "Just under 6,000, Ms. Jacobs." $6,000. That was nearly a month's worth of flour, sugar, and eggs. Nearly a month of labor and early mornings. I felt my throat tighten, but I stayed composed. "I want full documentation," I said. "Print every transfer, date, time, and IP address if you can." He nodded. "Of course. It may take a day or two, but we'll get it." As I left the bank, my phone buzzed. A message from Monique. "You didn't have to go behind my back, Mama. You're making this worse." I stopped right there on the sidewalk. How did she know I'd been at the bank? Maybe the freeze triggered a notification. I typed back, "We'll talk when you show me the papers you signed in my name." Then I put the phone in my purse and refused to look at the 3 dots that started blinking beneath her name. Next stop, the county registrar. The office was in one of those old buildings with marble floors that echoed every step. A woman at the front desk took my ID and disappeared into the back. After a few minutes, she returned with a thick folder and handed me a copy of the assignment of trade name. The signature glared at me again. My name, but not my hand. The L leaned wrong. I pointed to it. "That's forged," I said quietly. "I need to file an affidavit of forgery." She handed me a form, Affidavit of Fraudulent Filing. It required a notary, 2 forms of ID, and a $20 filing fee. "You'll also want to attach a police report," she added gently. "Otherwise, it can be delayed." A police report? My stomach knotted. I'd worked my whole life avoiding trouble, paying taxes, keeping things clean. But now trouble had come, wearing my daughter's face. I thanked her, filled in what I could, and stepped out into the cold air. I opened my spiral notebook on the hood of my car and wrote, "Step 4, file police report. Bring copy of fraudulent document. Keep emotion low. Stick to facts." I was halfway to the precinct when Monique called. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mama, what are you doing?" she said, her voice trembling with anger. "Protecting what's mine," I replied. "You're overreacting. The LLC was for taxes. I told you that. The bakery is still yours." "Then why are the utilities, lease, and bank transfers in your name?" I asked. She paused. "Because you don't understand how modern business works. You've been retired too long. I was trying to build something sustainable for both of us." "For both of us?" I repeated. "Then why did you change the locks?" Silence. Then she exhaled sharply. "You're tired, Mama. You're confused. I'll come by later. We'll fix this before it gets ugly." Before it gets ugly. That's what people say right before they make it ugly. At the precinct, I waited nearly an hour before a young officer called me in. His name tag read Holloway. He was polite, though clearly uncertain how to file a case like this. I explained the situation, showed him the forged document, and handed over the registrar's number. He listened carefully, then said, "Ma'am, we can open a report for suspected identity theft and forgery, but since this involves business assets and family, it might also be a civil matter. You may need to consult an attorney." "I understand," I said, "but I want a record that I never signed that document." He typed quickly, then printed a case receipt. "Case number 23Z4157, he said. "Keep this for your records. If it escalates, the affidavit will help." I thanked him, signed, and tucked the report behind my bank documents. As I stood to leave, he hesitated. "Miss Jacobs," he said quietly, "I'm sorry it's your daughter. That's tough." I nodded, my throat dry. "Tough, yes," I said, "but not impossible." Outside, I sat in my car and stared at the little case receipt. My mother's ring caught a beam of sunlight on the steering wheel. I rubbed it once and whispered, "I'm not done." That afternoon, I stopped by my landlord's office. The agent, Mr. Henley, was an older white man who always smelled faintly of pipe tobacco. "Ah, Ms. Jacobs," he said when he saw me. "Everything all right at the bakery?" "Not exactly," I said. "I need a copy of my current lease." He opened a file drawer, flipped through a few folders, and pulled one out. Here you go. Looks like it was updated last August." "Who signed it?" I asked. He checked. "Well, I've got your signature from 2 years ago on the original, but this amended lease was signed by, let's see, Monique Jacobs, managing member. You didn't sign this one." My heart sank. "Did you verify with me before accepting that change?" He frowned. "She said she was your authorized agent. She had business registration papers and an EIN. Everything looked proper." "She wasn't," I said flatly. "She isn't." He looked uneasy. "If there's fraud, you'll need to bring proof. But until a court rules otherwise, we have to honor the current leaseholder." I thanked him, walked out, and sat on the curb for a long time, my hands trembling. Around me, the world went on as usual. People laughing, delivery trucks rumbling, the smell of fried catfish from the diner across the street. But inside, I felt something crack. Not defeat, something colder and sharper like resolve. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Step 5, lawyer." That evening, I searched the legal aid number printed on the back of a brochure from the precinct. They scheduled me an appointment for Friday morning with a volunteer attorney named Ms. Daniels. Until then, I had homework, gather everything: originals, receipts, digital screenshots, text messages, facts only. That night, as I organized papers across my kitchen table, I found the small velvet box again. I opened it, looked at my mother's ring, and remembered something she used to say: "Don't let anyone write your name on something you built with your sweat." I whispered it aloud, let it settle in the room, then closed the box carefully. Just before midnight, I heard a knock at my door. 3 slow raps. My stomach twisted. Through the peephole, I saw Monique's car in the driveway. "Mama, open up," she called softly. "We need to talk." I didn't move. The moonlight hit her face, and even through the glass, I could see she wasn't here to apologize. "Mama," she said again, voice lower now, "you're making a mistake that's going to ruin everything." I backed away from the door and whispered to myself, "No, baby, you already did." And then she said something that made my skin crawl. Words I hadn't heard since I was a child. "If you just trust me," she said, "none of this would have to hurt." Her voice was sugar on glass. I stood frozen, the ring warm against my palm, knowing that the next move I made could either save my bakery or destroy my family. I did not open the door that night. I let Monique's words dissolve into the hallway and wrote them down in my spiral notebook exactly as she said them. If you just trust me, none of this would have to hurt. I underlined trust 3 times. Then I slid the velvet ring box back into my purse because I knew tomorrow would be a day I would need both hands steady. If any of you watching have ever been told something was for your own good while your name was being erased, tell me in the comments. I want to know how you found your footing again. By morning, the trap started to show its teeth. First came an email from a law firm I had never heard of. Baxter and Crowley, PLLC. Subject line: cease and desist, trespass and interference. The letter said I was disrupting operations at MJEDBA Lorraine's Hearth, and warned that if I entered the premises or communicated with vendors, I would face civil action and potential criminal trespass. At the bottom, under a neat signature block, someone had typed, "Counsel to Managing Member MJE." There was a phone number and a downtown address. I printed the letter, laid it on my table, and next to it placed my original business license with my name, my EIN letter with my name, and the police case slip with the number I could recite like a hymn. I rubbed my mother's ring with my thumb until the gold warmed my skin. "Facts," I whispered. "Paper will testify." Then the phone calls began. Mr. Walker from Produce told me Monique had emailed a vendor consolidation notice, instructing bills to be sent to MJE only. The coffee roaster left a voicemail saying, "We've been advised ownership changed. Please confirm?" My landlord's agent forwarded a message from Monique's operations director, requesting that only authorized personnel hold keys. And on our bakery Instagram, a story appeared, a smiling photo of Monique with a caption that made my chest ache. "So proud to finally take over my mama's vision so she can rest." Hearts and clapping hands poured in from people who loved the idea of a daughter stepping up. A woman from church commented, "Your mama deserves the break." I made more tea than any one woman should drink before noon and started calling numbers. I called the Baxter and Crowley line and got a receptionist who spoke in clipped syllables like a metronome. "Is Mr. Baxter available?" I asked, regarding a cease and desist sent to me in error. After a hold that felt like a sermon with no benediction, a young man came on. He said he represented MJE and had documentation of my consent to transfer. "Send me the documentation," I said. "All of it. I'll wait." He promised to email. What arrived an hour later was a packet stitched together like a quilt sewn in a hurry. A resolution of sole proprietor to assign trade name, a consent to member-managed structure, and a durable power of attorney naming Monique as my agent for financial and business affairs. The dates were late August. The notary stamp was the same, Bradley Knox. The witness signature looked like someone wrote a name while riding in the back of a bus. My middle initial wandered again, and the address listed for me was a street I had never lived on, a number off by 2 digits and a zip code from across town. I took a photo of the signature with my phone and zoomed in the way you look at a suspicious cake to see if it's fallen in the middle. The slant of the R, the break in the E. I could have identified that hand with my eyes closed because it was not mine. Above all, the power of attorney claimed I had appeared before the notary on a Tuesday morning at 11. But on that day and hour, my calendar said I was elbow deep in red velvet batter, while a busload of retirees lined up for slices. I had a receipt from the flour supplier timestamped 10 past 10. I had a photo Monique herself posted of me, frosting cakes at 12 noon, smiling with a pipe and bag in my hand. I opened my notebook to a fresh page and wrote, "Trap, fabricated POA plus assignment, same notary, wrong address, wrong Tuesday, social media alibi." I drew a box and wrote inside it, "Check notary commission." I typed Alabama notary lookup into my computer and pulled up the Secretary of State's site. I entered Bradley Knox, then the commission number printed beneath his stamp. The page blinked and returned a plain table. Commission belongs to Bradley N. Knox. Address in a different county. Commission expiration dated last year in early spring. Expired. I stared at that word until my throat tingled. I took a screenshot with the timestamp showing today's date, printed it, and stapled it to the packet Monique's lawyer had sent. On the margin, I wrote, "Commission expired. Stamp invalid. Possible fraud." At noon, I drove to the UPS store listed under the notary's address in Monique's paperwork. A clerk with tired eyes told me they did not have a notary by that name. "We've had folks asking," she said. "He used to rent a mailbox, but he moved." She offered to print a statement that he was not on their current notary roster. I thanked her and slid the sheet protectors back into my manila folder like I was sheathing knives. On my way out, my phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number, a link to a Facebook post where Monique had written, "When aging parents become vulnerable to confusion, it's our duty to step in. With love." Underneath, a woman had commented, "Hard decisions, but for her own good." Those 4 words felt like a needle sewing a lie through my name. For her own good. There it was, the motif I could not escape, the lullaby of control. I pulled into the lot of the county clerk's office and sat for a moment watching my own breath fog the windshield. I took off my mother's ring and placed it in the velvet box, then closed the lid gently, as if I were tucking her hand back under a quilt. "Walk in calm," I told myself. "Let paper talk." At the counter, I requested the original file for my business license. The clerk brought a folder. Inside, clipped to the back, was a photocopy of my driver's license used to verify the August filings. But the photo was a grainy rectangle that looked like it had been photographed off a screen, and the license number had 2 digits transposed. I asked if they kept the in-person sign-in logs for notary visits. "We don't notarize here," she said. "These are brought to us already stamped." I thanked her and filled out the affidavit of fraudulent filing in neat block letters, attaching the expired commission printout and the photo of Monique's noon post with the date clear as daylight. I paid the fee in cash and asked for a stamped copy. The clerk slid it across the counter and lowered her voice. "You'll want an attorney, ma'am, someone who knows elder financial exploitation statutes." "I have an appointment Friday," I said. "Ms. Daniels, legal aid." "Good," she replied. "Bring everything." Outside, I called the police non-emergency line and added the new documents to my existing report. The operator asked me to email them to a secure address, and I did within minutes, titling the email, "Addendum Forged POA Expired Notary." Then I drove home and spread the day's harvest across the table in chronological order. Cease and desist, forged POA, expired commission lookup, social media alibi, affidavit receipt, like laying out ingredients before a bake. My sister stopped by with a pot of greens she knew I would not have cooked today. She listened, shook her head, and said, "She's building a wall of paper around you, hoping you'll get tired before you find the gate." I smiled without humor. "I found a hinge," I said, tapping the expired notary printout. That evening, another email landed from Baxter and Crowley. The subject line read, "Notice of temporary restraining application." The body said they would file for a temporary order to prevent me from interfering with business operations, and attached a draft with a hearing date set for the following week. The draft quoted that soft weapon again, "for her own good." It claimed I was exhibiting confusion and forgetfulness. It promised stability if I would let go. I stood up so fast my chair scraped the floor. Confusion? Forgetfulness? I turned to my notebook, flipped to the first page where I had written, Day 1, taking back what's mine, and then to today's page, listing each step like rails on a track. I read each entry aloud, dates, times, names, until my breath steadied. Then I wrote in careful letters, counter with facts, bank freeze, case number, expired notary, social alibi, POA discrepancies, wrong address. Under that, I added, call Ms. Daniels, bring TRO draft. Just as I capped my pen, headlights swept across my living room wall. Tires crunched on my gravel. A heavy knock sounded at my door, measured, official. Through the peephole, I saw a deputy standing on my porch with a manila envelope in his hand. "Ms. Jacobs," he called, "I have papers for you to accept service." I took a breath, slid my mother's ring back onto my finger like armor, opened the door, and the deputy held out the envelope as he said the words I had been bracing for all day. Words that would either push me out of my own shop or light the path to walk back in. The deputy's envelope was heavier than it looked. Inside, a draft petition for a temporary restraining order, a request for an emergency hearing, and a stack of exhibits printed from my own life, screenshots of Monique's posts about protecting me, a photo of me at the bakery with flour on my cheek that someone had captioned, "Mom forgets to clock out again," and a letter from Baxter and Crowley asserting I was impeding lawful operations. I placed each page in my spiral notebook's plastic sleeves the way I had once slid warm cookies into parchment bags. Careful, precise, determined not to break anything that would later need to be shown. I slipped my mother's ring off and set it in its velvet box to keep my hands from clenching. If you've ever had someone reframe your life as a problem to be solved, not a person to be respected, tell me in the comments. Say what you named it and how you kept breathing through the naming. By Friday morning, I sat in the legal aid lobby with my manila folder and the velvet box atop it like a small private altar. Ms. Daniels came to get me herself, a black woman around my daughter's age with hair pulled into a sharp bun and eyes that registered everything. "Ms. Jacobs?" she asked. "Come on back." In her office, she listened without interrupting while I laid out the sequence. The sweeps from the bank, the registrar's text, the forged assignment, the expired notary commission, the cease and desist, the deputy on my porch. When I was done, she leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and spoke in a voice that didn't waste a word. "This has a name," she said. "Several names. Elder financial exploitation, undue influence, conversion, forgery, fraud on a filing office. And if they used a stale commission to notarize, that is a separate offense." Hearing the words was like the first time a doctor correctly names a pain you've tried to ignore. It didn't make it hurt less, but the shape of it came into focus. Ms. Daniels pulled a legal pad close. "Here's what we can do, in order. 1. We file a response to dissolve their temporary restraining order and attach your evidence. Bank freeze, police report, expired commission, discrepancy in address, the social media timestamp that puts you at the bakery when you supposedly appeared before the notary. 2. We move for a temporary injunction against further transfer of assets, including the lockout, pending a hearing on ownership. 3. We send preservation letters to the bank, the point-of-sale processor, and your landlord. No destruction of records, no changes to access. 4. We contact the Secretary of State's Notary Division with a complaint about Mr. Knox and request his journal, if it exists. 5. We report to Adult Protective Services. That last one is not about you being weak. It is about documenting the pattern so agencies move faster. She paused, watching my face. I nodded. "Say it again," I said quietly. "Elder financial exploitation." "Exactly," she said. "And the phrase she keeps using, 'for your own good,' that is classic. It frames control as care. Judges have heard it. We will not argue about feelings in court. We will argue about paper." We began building a packet. Ms. Daniels asked for timelines. I had them. Names and dates. I had them. She needed signed copies of the first lease, my business license, The EIN letter, the bank statements, screenshots of the point-of-sale settings, the registrar's affidavit, and the expired commission lookup. I handed each over. "You are already doing half my job," she said with a quick smile. "Keep that notebook close. It will be the spine of this case." She dictated a list of subpoenas, the bank's access logs with IP addresses for the sweeps, the processor's two-factor authentication changes, the landlord's correspondence showing who represented themselves as my agent, the registrar's intake dates and cover sheets, the UPS store's statement that no notary by that name was present. She drafted a letter to Baxter and Crowley demanding they withdraw their application for a restraining order based on a forged power of attorney, warning of sanctions if they pressed forward after notice. "In plain terms," she said, "we are telling them this is not a family misunderstanding. It is a legal wrong." Before I left, she handed me a photocopy of a statute with a yellow sticky note. "Read the definition of undue influence," she said. "You will hear yourself in it." Back home, I made a plate from my sister's greens and ate at the edge of my table, while reading that statute out loud like scripture. It spoke of excessive persuasion that causes another person to act or refrain from acting by overcoming that person's free will, listing tactics like isolation, dependency, control of necessities, and use of affection or intimidation. I circled a sentence and wrote in the margin, "This is the tone of those 4 words, for your own good." By afternoon, Ms. Daniels called. "I filed our motion to dissolve and our request for a temporary injunction," she said. Clerk stamped them. "Hearing set for early next week. Between now and then, no contact with their counsel outside of me, and no entering the bakery, no matter how much it hurts, because they will twist it. You will be the steady hand." I promised. Then I picked up my phone and did something that felt both small and brave. I changed the name of Monique's contact in my phone from Baby Girl to Monique Jacobs. Names matter. Around dusk, the bakery posted a glossy video. Monique in a powder blue blouse walking through the shop, smiling at the camera. "Friends," she said, "many of you know I have taken over operations so my mother can rest. We've had some confusion this week, but I promise you it's for her own good. We will not let instability disrupt our service. Please be kind and give us grace while we protect our family." The comments flared with praise and a few questions. Someone asked where I was. A reply from the bakery account read, "Lorraine is resting at home and stepping back due to memory issues." My hands shook so hard I had to set the phone down. I opened the velvet box, slid my mother's ring back on, and went to the sink. I washed my hands the way I do after a long shift. Warm water, slow circles, rinse, dry, until the tremor quieted. Then I returned to my notebook and wrote today's date in words, the way my grandmother used to write checks, Friday, late winter. Beneath it I wrote, "We named it, we filed, we asked for preservation." And then a line that surprised me as I wrote it, "I am not ashamed." The doorbell rang. I did not jump this time. Through the peephole, I saw Mr. Walker on my porch with a battered accordion folder. When I opened the door, he held it out. "All our purchase orders since opening," he said, "plus the change request Monique sent last summer. You'll want this." Inside, he sat and watched me flip to a form dated late August, the week everything seemed to pivot. There was a scanned owner authorization attached with my signature, wrong again, the same drifting middle initial, the same sloped R. Mr. Walker shook his head. "I thought y'all had worked it out," he said softly. "I did not want to be in your business, but this ain't right." "Thank you," I said. "You did right to bring it." He cleared his throat. "One more thing," he said, pulling a crumpled receipt from his pocket. "Cash order for sweet potatoes, paid by Monique's personal card when she said the business card was being updated. Same day as this change request. Might matter." I placed the receipt beneath a paper clip with the purchase orders and wrote a note. "Personal card used while shifting accounts. Pattern of mingling funds." After he left, I brewed tea and called the Adult Protective Services number Ms. Daniels had given me. The woman on the line was kind without being sentimental. She took notes, asked about access to my bank, whether I felt physically safe, whether anyone had pressured me to sign documents. I told her plainly, "They say it is for my own good. It is not." She gave me an intake number and said an investigator would follow up. "Document everything," she said. I almost laughed. "Yes, ma'am," I replied. "I have been." Saturday came quiet and long. I didn't go near the bakery. I walked around my little house, dusted framed photographs, and stopped at the one of Monique at 6 with missing front teeth and pink barrettes. I pressed my fingers to the glass and let myself feel it for a minute. Grief, love, anger. The memory of the way she used to climb into my lap and fall asleep smelling like baby shampoo and crayons. Then I straightened the frame and turned back to the table. Paper may testify, but it cannot hold you when the air gets thin. I wore my mother's ring and let that be enough. On Sunday, I went to church, though I sat near the back because I did not trust my face not to tell on my heart. After the benediction, I was halfway to the door when Sister Elaine intercepted me, her mouth in a tight line. "Lorraine, baby, we're praying for you. Monique says you've been confused." Heads turned. I lifted my chin. "I am not confused," I said, steady. "I am careful." A few people nodded, a few looked away. Public humiliation has a temperature, hot on your skin, cold under your ribs. That afternoon, Ms. Daniels texted, "Check your email, draft declarations attached. Please review, sign, return." I read each line like a recipe, corrected one spelling of my street name, and signed my handwriting firm. I scanned them back and placed the originals beneath the velvet box. As evening fell, I heard the low hum of a car idling outside, and then a knock, 3 times, official and slow. I stood, smoothed my blouse, and slid my mother's ring into place like a promise. Through the peephole stood a uniform I did not recognize. Not a deputy this time, but a private process server in a windbreaker with a badge clipped at his belt. "Ms. Lorraine Jacobs," he called. "Yes," I answered, opening the door. He held out a thick packet. "Service of process," he said. "Petition for emergency guardianship." He tapped the top page. "Hearing set for the morning after next." The words blurred, then snapped into focus, sharp as glass. They were not just trying to take my bakery anymore. They were asking a court to take me. The word guardianship hummed in my ears long after the process server's car pulled away. I set the packet on the table and felt for the velvet box, needing the cool certainty of my mother's ring to anchor me. I slid it on, opened my spiral notebook, and wrote the heading in careful block letters. Emergency Guardianship Strategy. Below it, I listed what Ms. Daniels had told me at our first meeting about petitions like this. They move fast. They lean on phrases like confusion and safety. And they often succeed when a person shows up alone and unprepared. I drew a square and wrote inside it, "I will not show up alone." I called Ms. Daniels immediately. She picked up on the second ring. "Bring the packet," she said. "Tonight, if you can." I put the papers in a new manila folder, one for every battle, and drove downtown under a sky the color of cool ash. In her office, she read in silence, turning each page with 2 fingers, the way a careful baker checks the bottom of a cake for doneness. "They've asked for an emergency order naming your daughter as temporary guardian of person and property," she said at last. "If granted, she could control your access to accounts, decisions about care, and by extension, your business. We're going to fight this on 2 fronts at once." She flipped to a blank page on her legal pad and drew 2 columns. Column 1, Guardianship. We file an opposition with evidence of capacity. That means a physician letter, witness declarations from people who see you run your life competently, and your own affidavit explaining your routines and decisions. Column 2, Fraud and Conversion. We push our injunction on the business documents and the forged filings to show this petition is not about care. It's about control. Judges do not like guardianship being used as a backdoor to win a property dispute. "I can get a doctor's letter," I said. "My primary care is at Cooper Clinic. Nurse Harris knows me." "Call them first thing," she said. "Ask for a same-day capacity evaluation. If they tell you to wait, tell them you have a hearing." She glanced at the calendar. "We also need Adult Protective Services on record. Did you get a case number?" I gave it to her and watched her write it down, each letter and number tidy. "I'll contact the investigator," she said. "We'll also send a letter to Baxter and Crowley. Push this petition and we seek sanctions for abuse of process." She handed me a checklist. It looked like my life condensed into a recipe. Photo ID copies, medication list, bill pay schedule, tax filing proof, business ledger pages, letters from neighbors, pastor, bank officer, evidence of your daily routines. I had most of it. The rest I could get by morning. If you've ever had to prove you are still yourself, your mind, your name, your habits, tell me in the comments what you brought into the room. Sometimes the smallest object carries all the power. At home, I pulled my ledger pages and laid them next to my pill organizer, my calendar with neat boxes around checkups and sales tax deadlines, and the envelope of receipts I had labeled seed money 2 summers back. I called Sister Elaine despite the tight line she'd held after service. "I will write a letter," she said softly, contrition in her voice. "I have watched you run that bakery like a ship." I called Mr. Walker and the bank guard who always held the door for me mornings. Both agreed to sign short declarations that I was steady and present and not confused when we spoke. Then I set my alarm for just before dawn and slept with my notebook on the nightstand like a Bible I could reach for in the dark. At sunrise, I stood outside Cooper Clinic with a paper cup of bitter lobby coffee and my folder hugged to my chest. Nurse Harris recognized me and ushered me back between blood draws and flu shots. "We can do a mini mental state exam now," she murmured, "and Dr. Patel will write the letter." She gave me 3 words: apple, penny, table, and I tucked them away, repeated them when asked, copied shapes, counted backwards by 7s, and named the governor, the month, the day of the week. I knew all of it because I live my life by names and days and careful counted measures. Dr. Patel read my blood pressure, made a joke about bakers living long if they do not eat all the icing, and printed a letter on letterhead that said plainly, "No cognitive impairment observed. Ms. Jacobs demonstrates capacity to manage personal and financial decisions." Nurse Harris added a sentence of her own on a second sheet. In the years I have known Ms. Jacobs, she has been punctual, oriented, and a historian of her own care. I thanked them with tears hot on my cheeks and promised a sweet potato pie once I got my kitchen back. Back in my driveway, a white sedan idled with the county crest on the door. An Adult Protective Services investigator in a gray cardigan stepped out and introduced herself as Ms. Redding. "I can come back later," she offered, "but sometimes it helps to see life in motion." I invited her in, handed her a cup of tea, and placed my ledger, bank statements, doctor's letter, and police report on the table, like a still life of competence. She walked through my small house, glancing at the neatly labeled spice jars, the calendar on the fridge, the stack of utilities paid on time. She asked about my routine, my friends, my blood pressure. She asked if anyone had threatened me. "Only with kindness sharpened into control," I answered. Her eyes softened. "We hear that more than you'd think." She took notes and photos of the forged documents I had lined up beneath a ruler. At the door, she said, "I can't speak to the court, but my report will be in your file by evening. If the judge asks, Ms. Daniels can reference it." She squeezed my hand. "You are doing everything right." Before lunch, the church office called. Deacon Harris, who also chaired the benevolence committee, had questions. I asked if he would put his questions in writing. He paused, then said, "I've known you 30 years. I will write a character letter for the court. I cannot speak to family business, but I can speak to your steadiness." It wasn't everything, but it was one more stone stacked where I needed a wall. Ms. Daniels filed our opposition by mid-afternoon, attaching Dr. Patel's letter, the APS intake confirmation, and the declarations that had started to arrive. She sent me a copy with a note. "Breathe. Preserve your strength." She had also emailed the notary division. They replied that Mr. Knox's commission expired last spring, and they would initiate an inquiry. She forwarded that too, highlighting the words, "expired commission," as if underlining a verse. That evening brought its own official pressure. A patrol car rolled up slow and a uniformed officer stepped onto my porch. He said the court had ordered a wellness check based on concerns raised in a guardianship petition. He was young, careful with his words. I invited him in, offered to show my medications and the hot tea I had just brewed. He nodded, glanced around, asked me to state my name and the date, asked if I felt safe. "I feel angry," I said, "and steady." He wrote that down. When he left, he said, "This write-up goes into the system. The judge can see it." I wrote "wellness check," "no concerns" in my notebook and drew a small star beside it. The next morning, Ms. Daniels asked me to meet her outside the courthouse at first light to review the flow of the hearing. "They will try to recast everything," she warned. "They will say you are tired, suggestible, overwhelmed. We will not argue adjectives. We will show documents." She ran me through questions she would ask if I took the stand. How I open the bakery, how I order supplies, how I pay bills, the sequence of fraudulent filings, the change in locks, the phrase that kept showing up like a stain. "Say it once," she said. "Let the court hear the lullaby of control." I spent the day in logistics. I made 2 additional copies of every exhibit and labeled each folder with a strip of blue painter's tape and a number written in words. Exhibit 1, Bank Freeze. Exhibit 2, Registrar Affidavit. Exhibit 3, Expired Commission. Exhibit 4, POS 2-Factor Log. Exhibit 5, Physician Capacity Letter. Exhibit 6, APS intake confirmation. Exhibit 7, vendor change requests. Exhibit 8, social media timestamp. Exhibit 9, wellness check. I packed them in order, slid the velvet box on top, and felt the weight of my mother and my work settle into my hands. Toward dusk, a message appeared from Baxter and Crowley to Ms. Daniels, copied to me. They would narrow the relief requested to property guardianship only, as if that were a kindness. Ms. Daniels wrote back one sentence that made me exhale a laugh despite myself. No slice of an apple is not an apple. She explained to me by phone. If they get control of your property, they get the bakery. We are not slicing anything. Around midnight, I stood at my sink and rehearsed my own name out loud, not because I doubted it, but because I loved the sound of it steady in the dark. Lorraine Jacobs, baker, owner, mother. I slid my ring off and on, the small circle catching the light, and placed my notebook by the door with my keys. I slept for a few hours and woke before the alarm, that old cafeteria clock ringing in my bones the way it had for decades before dawn. Morning cracked open pale and thin. I put on my good navy dress and the cardigan with stitched pockets deep enough for a pen and a peppermint. I tucked a peppermint into one, a pen into the other, and the velvet box into my purse. On the porch, the air felt like a held breath. At the courthouse steps, Ms. Daniels was already waiting, a stack of binders hugged to her side. She glanced at my folders, at the neat blue labels, and smiled. "You brought a ledger to a fistfight," she said. "Good." We passed through the metal detector, the tray scraping as I slid my purse and the velvet box through. The deputy on the other side handed them back with a nod, and I felt my mother's ring warm through the fabric. In the hallway, outside the courtroom door, Monique stood with a lawyer in a gray suit and a woman I recognized from her office videos, the operations director. Monique wore a soft pink dress I had sewn for her once upon a time, altered now, the hem lifted, the waist taken in. Her face lit when she saw me, the way people smile at a child who does not understand. "Mama," she said, stepping forward, "we can still make this easy. Just sit with me and tell the judge you want to rest. It's for your own good." Those words were a script I had learned by heart and refused to recite. I did not answer. "Mrs. Daniels guided me to a seat at the end of the bench. She placed a hand over my notebook and squeezed once. "Remember," she whispered, "documents, not drama." The bailiff opened the door. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and dust. We took our places, stacks aligned, pens uncapped. The judge entered, robes whispering, expression unreadable. He looked younger than I expected and tired in the way of people who decide other people's days for a living. Case of Monique Jacobs petitioning for emergency guardianship over Lorraine Jacobs, the clerk intoned. I inhaled and tasted peppermint and iron and the faint sweetness of a memory that I refused to let bleed. I straightened my spine, set my fingertips on the edge of my spiral notebook, and felt the weight of my mother's ring settle like a small, steady oath. "Counsel," the judge said, peering over his glasses, "are you ready to proceed?" And as the words echoed, I lifted my eyes, because whatever came next would test the shape of my name and the truth of my paper. "Ready to proceed," Ms. Daniels answered, and the room gathered itself like dough under a palm. Baxter stood first, gray suit, smooth, voice pitched for pity. He spoke of daughters and duty, of confusion and safety and instability at a beloved neighborhood bakery. He said, for her own good, the way a lullaby loops, sweet and soft until you stop hearing the words. He held up a photo of me with flour on my cheek and called it disorientation. He read comments from the bakery's page as if hearts and hand claps were evidence. Ms. Daniels let him finish without blinking. Then she rose and placed a thin stack of our exhibits on the rail, each tabbed and named like a clean recipe. "Your Honor," she said, "this guardianship petition is not about care. It is about control. We will show capacity, and we will show a pattern of fraudulent filings used to convert a business." She began with the simple bones of a life. "Exhibit 1, she said, sliding up the physician letter on Cooper Clinic letterhead. "No cognitive impairment observed." "Exhibit 2, the APS intake confirmation, the investigator's visit time-stamped and logged, no immediate safety concerns." "Exhibit 3, the wellness check report, oriented to person, place, time, home tidy, medications organized, then the paper that mattered for the bakery." "Exhibit 4, the bank freeze confirmation and list of Friday sweeps, each one printed with dates and amounts that made my jaw set." "Exhibit 5, the registrar affidavit with my handwriting steady where it said, 'I did not sign.' Exhibit 6, the Secretary of State email, 'Commission expired last spring.'" She paused on that one so the ink could sink in. "Exhibit 7, a compilation of social media posts with timestamps showing me at a piping bag the very hour I supposedly sat before a notary." "Exhibit 8, vendor change requests with the same drifting middle initial and wrong address." "Exhibit 9, my own ledger pages, dated in words, the spine I had been writing since day one." Baxter objected to relevance more than once. "Overruled," the judge said mildly each time, eyes on the dates. Ms. Daniels called me as her first witness. Standing felt like carrying a sheet pan loaded edge to edge. You keep it level with breath and wrists. I placed my palm on the Bible, spoke my name steady, and sat. Ms. Daniels' questions were practical, not poetic. What time did I rise to proof dough? How did I place orders? Where did I keep my receipts? How often did I pay sales tax? I answered like I was teaching a young baker the house way, slowly, exactly, without flourish. She slid me the forged power of attorney. "Is this your signature, Ms. Jacobs?" "No, ma'am," I said. "How can you tell?" "The Arlene's wrong. My middle initial wanders. And I never signed a thing on that Tuesday morning because I was working a red velvet order for the Stover family reunion." We offered the supplier receipt timed 10 past 10 and Monique's noon video of me frosting cakes. The judge leaned closer to the monitor when the caption showed the date. Baxter cross-examined with the kind of smile that wants you to play a part. "Ms. Jacobs," he said, "have you ever forgotten to lock the bakery?" "Once," I said, 3 years back. I turned around at the end of the block and corrected it. "Have you ever misplaced your keys?" "Like every person alive," I said dry, and a few people in the gallery let their chests out. He showed me a photo of my apron tossed over a chair. "Does this look organized?" "It looks like a person takes it off to sit a minute," I said. He showed me the Instagram caption, "Mom forgets to clock out." "Do you forget to clock out?" "I do not clock out," I replied. "I am the owner." He shifted to the bankers. "You trusted your daughter with modern banking?" "I trusted my daughter with many things," I said. "I did not give her my name." Next came witnesses. Mr. Benton from the bank testified with a politeness that held steel. The sweeps were enabled by text confirmation to a number not ending with Ms. Jacobs's digits. he said, fingers resting on the log. "We have frozen them pending review." The young officer who did the wellness check spoke plainly. No signs of confusion. Ms. Jacobs was oriented and cooperative. Ms. Redding from APS explained undue influence without once using my daughter's name as a weapon. She said the phrase, "for her own good," often coats control in sugar. The UPS clerk's written statement was admitted without argument. No current notary by that name at that location. Baxter called Monique. She wore my pink dress as if it were a flag. Her voice softened, and she told the story she had curated online. "My mother is tired," she said. "She's worked hard her entire life. She loses receipts. She leaves ovens on." Ms. Daniels rose. "Specifics, please," she said. "Dates, times, documents." Monique faltered. "I don't keep a ledger." "So the only ledgers in this dispute belong to Ms. Jacobs," Ms. Daniels said. "Yes," Monique admitted, blinking fast. When asked how she obtained my signature for the filings, she said, "We sat at the kitchen table. She signed everything." "What kitchen?" Ms. Daniels asked. "Describe the table." Monique hesitated. "It's brown," she said, "a chocolate cake for a judge." The judge asked his own questions then, gentle but pointed. "Ms. Jacobs, how do you calculate sales tax?" "I multiply the taxable receipts by the local rate and remit monthly," I said, "and I keep a paper copy of each remittance, stamped." "Where are those copies?" "In my tin, labeled tax, second from the top." "Do you have them?" "Yes," I said, and Ms. Daniels slid them up months in order, envelopes stamped in ink as if time itself had agreed I was tidy. When both sides rested for the morning, the judge leaned back. "I am not prepared to grant an emergency guardianship today," he said, and the air changed temperature. "The evidence does not persuade me that Ms. Jacobs lacks capacity to manage her affairs at this time." He looked at Monique. "Petitioner has failed to meet the burden on an emergency basis. On the contrary, I see credible allegations of document fraud connected to a business dispute." He paused to make notes. "Accordingly, the petition for emergency guardianship is denied without prejudice. We will consolidate the pending temporary injunction application on the business filings and the restraining order request for a combined evidentiary hearing in 2 days. Between now and then, no destruction of documents, no changes to locks, no accessing of accounts outside ordinary expenses. Violations will be sanctioned." He looked at me. "Ms. Jacobs, secure counsel for that hearing." "I have," I said. He nodded once. "Good." I did not exhale until we were in the hallway and Ms. Daniels squeezed my arm. "That was not the verdict," she said softly, "but it was oxygen. Now we prepare the show." She meant the evidentiary hearing, but I heard the kitchen in it. The way you set up everything in reach before the rush. For 48 hours, my house became a staging line. Ms. Daniels drafted subpoenas for the processor's 2-factor authentication log, the landlord's email threads, and the phone records showing which number confirmed the bank sweeps. I walked the neighborhood collecting sworn statements. The mail carrier who watched me sign for registered letters without a flinch. The neighbor who saw me leave at 4 and return at 3 with flour on my cheek. Sister Elaine revising her letter with a paragraph that named what she had witnessed: steadiness under humiliation. The Secretary of State's notary unit emailed to say they could not locate a required journal for Mr. Knox for the month of August. "If a notary cannot produce a journal," Ms. Daniels murmured, "judges do not smile." She flagged it highlighter yellow. We added the landlord's acknowledgement that he accepted a lease amendment from managing member Monique without contacting the original signatory. We printed the bakery's "for her own good" posts in sequence and stapled them by date so the rhythm of that phrase could be heard the way a needle clicks on a groove. We pulled the purchase orders from Mr. Walker and paper-clipped the odd little receipt where Monique used her personal card on the day she told him the business card was being updated, a bright thread in the fabric. The night before the hearing, I baked in my head. I lined up steps, imagined questions, rehearsed answers like measures. Yes, no, I did not. I placed my mother's ring in the velvet box and set it on my folder so I would not forget to wear it. If you've ever had to gather witnesses to your own ordinary life, I said into the empty kitchen, leave your advice in the comments. Someone like me is reading it tonight. Morning came wearing rain. Ms. Daniels met me again at the courthouse steps, her umbrella big enough for both of us. Inside, the hallway was busier, reporters with notepads, vendors waiting on a different case, a man in a neon vest whispering into his phone. Baxter stood with a thin smile and a stack of glossy binders. Monique scrolled her screen, not looking up, as if the facts could be edited by refusing to see them. The bailiff opened the courtroom. "All rise," the clerk called. I touched the velvet box one more time, slid the ring onto my finger, lifted my spiral notebook, and felt the weight of each tabbed exhibit against my palm. Ms. Daniels leaned in and said, "Today is witnesses and proof. We walk it in, we lay it down, and we let paper speak." And with my name firm in my mouth and my mother's ring warm on my hand, I stepped over the threshold into the evidentiary hearing, the door closing behind me like a page turning on the showdown. The hearing room felt smaller than before, crowded with paper and weather and the breath of strangers. I set my spiral notebook on counsel table, the tabs like little flags, and rested my hand over the velvet box for a second as if to take its temperature. My mother's ring sat warm on my finger. Ms. Daniels had already arranged our exhibits in a neat column. Facing us, Baxter's binders gleamed like a bakery case with too much lacquer. "Counsel, call your first witness," the judge said, and the clash began without clangor, just the steady, clipped cadence of a courtroom working its muscle. Ms. Daniels called Mr. Benton from the bank again, this time with the subpoenaed logs. He explained the Friday sweeps in the polite language of systems. "Here are the token confirmations," he said, opening a spreadsheet we had printed and tabbed. Text codes went to a number ending 759. That number is not associated with Ms. Jacobs' profile. Ms. Daniels asked, "And whose name is on the destination account?" "Monique Jacobs Enterprises," he answered, abbreviated MJE. She lifted the bank's letter on letterhead confirming the freeze and laid it on the rail like a cooled sheet pan. Baxter approached for cross. "Is it possible Ms. Jacobs authorized her daughter verbally?" Mr. Benton kept his tone courteous. "Bank policy requires written authorization for linking external accounts and a text verification to the owner's registered number." "So you are certain Ms. Jacobs did not confirm?" "The logs show a different number. We can confirm only what the records show." The judge nodded. Dates were already being written in his margins. Next, Ms. Daniels called the registrar clerk with the original file. We had marked the forged assignment and the affidavit I filed. "Whose signature purports to be on this?" Ms. Daniels asked. "Lorraine Jacobs," the clerk said. "And who notarized?" "A stamp reads Bradley N. Knox." Ms. Daniels slipped up the Secretary of State email. Commission expired last spring. No journal produced for August. The clerk's mouth pressed thin. Our office accepts notarized documents at face value. If the stamp is invalid, we rely on the court to say so. Then came the landlord's agent, Mr. Henley, folding his hands. You accepted a lease amendment from managing member Monique without contacting the original signatory, Ms. Daniels asked. We did, he admitted. She presented registration paperwork. Did you verify with Ms. Jacobs? No. Going forward, will you? The judge lifted a brow and Mr. Henley colored. Yes. A hush kept reforming and breaking on the benches like surf. Each document we laid down seemed to cool the narrative that I was a confused woman whose daughter had wrapped her in gauze. Miss Daniels called me again, not to retell my life, but to stitch detail through the record. Ms. Jacobs, she said, walk us through a normal Monday at the bakery prior to August. I spoke cleanly. Rise before dawn, measure flour by weight, check par sheet, confirm orders, text Mr. Walker for produce, deposit the weekend cash in the morning drop, log expenses, print the sales tax worksheet at month end. She asked how I stored receipts. Tin under my bed, I said, labeled in masking tape by month and category. She asked me to open the tin we had brought. The judge leaned forward as envelopes appeared, months written in words, corners softened by use. Baxter came gentle for cross. Ms. Jacobs, do you ever need help with your phone? Sometimes, I said. My thumbs are not teenagers. A few smiles crested and fell. Would you say your daughter has been helpful? I would say my daughter has been clever. He lifted the photo of my apron on a chair. Is this the apron you leave carelessly? That is the apron I wore to pay sales tax on time, I said, and Ms. Daniels slid the stamped envelopes to match the dates like a baker aligning layers. The judge asked one question of me. Who chose your business name? I did, I answered, at my kitchen table with a paper placemat and a pencil. He nodded, wrote something, and I felt the room's axis tilt a hair. Then came Ms. Daniels's pivot. She called the UPS store clerk to authenticate her statement that no such notary worked there now. We offered a photo of the notary board and a manager's letter. She called APS investigator Ms. Redding, who defined undue influence for the room, the way a teacher reads a definition to a class and waits for breath to return. Common phrases include, for your own good, she said, used to reframe control as care. Indicators include isolation, gatekeeping of finances, and changes in legal instruments without truly informed consent. The judge looked down then at Baxter. Your witnesses? He called Monique first. She took the stand with a carefully folded handkerchief and the face she used for social videos, open and wounded. I never wanted this, she said. I only wanted to protect my mother. From what? Ms. Daniels asked on cross. From stress, Monique said. From making mistakes. Ms. Daniels kept her voice flat. List 3 mistakes with dates, please. Monique blinked. She left an oven on in spring. What month? Spring. Day? I don't remember. Police? Fire? No. Any burned product? No. Next mistake? Monique swallowed. She misplaced keys. When? Last winter? I found them in her coat. Ms. Daniels nodded as if hearing a recipe with too few ingredients. Let us discuss documents. How did you obtain a power of attorney? We signed at the kitchen table. Name the witnesses. Monique stared at the paper. Mr. Knox notarized. Ms. Daniels rested a fingertip on the Secretary of State email. His commission was expired. Do you know this man? He was recommended. By whom? A friend. Name? Silence gathered like batter not yet poured. Baxter called the operations director, who spoke of stability and brand risk. Ms. Daniels asked if she had ever kept the books. No. Filed sales tax? No. Opened at 5? No. Then your expertise is what? Content strategy. The judge let out a small breath through his nose that might have been a laugh. He swallowed. Finally, Baxter called a woman from church who had commented on our posts. She said she loved Monique's videos. Ms. Daniels let that stand without a single question. Not every bowl needs scraping. We broke for a brief recess. In the hallway, rain braided the courthouse windows. Sister Elaine touched my elbow. "You are standing straight," she whispered. "Keep standing." I pressed my thumb to my mother's ring and nodded. Back inside, Ms. Daniels returned to the notary. "We have subpoenaed Mr. Knox," she said, "but he has not appeared. In lieu, we offer the Secretary of State's letter and a business registry showing his commission lapsed before the dates in question." Baxter objected. "Foundation." The judge overruled. "It goes to wait," he said. "I will consider it." Then Ms. Daniels did something I will not forget. She asked to play a short clip from the bakery's own page, the one Monique had posted with that phrase braided through it like icing. For her own good, Monique's voice cooed over footage of my hands kneading dough cut away from my face, as if the hands could be anyone's. Ms. Daniels let the words hang. "Your Honor," she said, "this is not the language of consent. This is the language of cover." Baxter's rebuttal leaned hard on love. "We are not thieves," he said. "We are a family trying to prevent decline." He pointed at me, palm open. "Ms. Jacobs is a fine woman, but fatigue blurs edges. A guardian of property would relieve pressure." The judge tapped his pen once. "Guardianship to resolve a property dispute is disfavored," he said mildly. Then to Ms. Daniels, "Remedy?" "Restore the status quo," she answered. "Enjoin further transfers. Void the forged filings. Require return of funds. Grant access to the premises under the original lease until adjudication." She did not ask for the whole cake yet. She asked for the oven door not to be slammed on my hands. Before closings, the judge leaned forward. "Ms. Jacobs," he said, "one question for you." I stood. "If I grant the injunction and restore access, can you operate the bakery safely while this case proceeds?" I placed my palm on my spiral notebook and felt its spine. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I have my par sheets and my staff list. I can order supplies this afternoon. I will document every transaction, and I will not change a single lock until this court says, 'Who holds the keys?'" He looked at Monique. "If I grant the injunction, will you comply with preservation and non-interference?" Her jaw tightened. "If you say so," she answered, "it is for her." She caught herself. The word hovered. The judge raised a hand. "Do not finish that sentence," he said, not unkindly. We rested. The judge stacked our exhibits into 3 orderly piles. The rain slowed to a whisper against the high windows. I could hear the scratch of his pen and the faint hum of the air vent, and under that, my own heart keeping count like a metronome in a quiet kitchen. If you've ever stood at the edge of a verdict with your whole life lined up in paper tabs, I whispered inside myself for anyone listening later, breathe with me now and hold steady. The judge cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and looked up at us. One mother, one daughter, 2 sets of counsel, a bakery between us like a loaf cooling on a rack. I am prepared, he said, to rule on the injunction. and the next words he spoke would either open my door or leave me watching my ovens through glass. "The injunction is granted," the judge said, and the room exhaled like a loaf releasing steam. He spoke slowly, each clause measured. "The court restores the pre-August status quo. The lockout is enjoined. No funds shall be transferred from accounts associated with the bakery, except in the ordinary course of business by Ms. Lorraine Jacobs as owner, pending final adjudication. The filings purporting to assign the trade name and assets are preliminarily voided subject to a merits hearing. All parties shall preserve documents, devices, and accounts. Any violation will draw sanctions." He turned a page. "The petition for emergency guardianship is denied. We will set a schedule for discovery." The gavel did not fall. It simply hovered in the gravity of his voice. I felt the weight of my mother's ring, the small circle now warm as a coin fresh from a pocket. Ms. Daniels' hand found my forearm and pressed once. Permission to breathe. Baxter leaned toward Monique and began the quiet, desperate whispering of a man whose case had lost its story. The judge added one last line, looking over his glasses. "Given concerns raised about notarization, I am referring materials to the district attorney for review." Paper moved. Pen tips paused. I wrote it down in my spiral notebook in tidy, grateful letters. Referral to DA. Then I wrote today's date in words and underlined it once. Outside, the rain had thinned to mist. We stood in the hallway while the clerk typed the minute order and the bailiff brought us copies with blue stamps bright as skies I had not seen in months. Ms. Daniels reviewed each page. "This gives us the kitchen back," she said. "We keep it exactly as it was. We run clean and we list everything. Return receipts for any funds that come home. Photograph the locks before and after. Document staff access. We act like the court is walking beside us." If any of you listening have ever walked out of a courtroom holding more than paper, holding your breath, your name, your work, drop a line in the comments. Somebody needs to hear what steadiness feels like right now. Mr. Henley, the landlord's agent, met us at the curb as if he had been summoned by an old bell. He cleared his throat. "Keys," he said, opening his palm. "I've notified our locksmith to repin to the original cylinder. You may collect new copies today. We'll maintain camera footage for the last 90 days. I thanked him. "And Mr. Henley," I said, "please put in writing that any future amendments require my wet signature, verified by phone, with a callback to a number on file." He nodded like a student who has learned not to copy answers. At the bank, Mr. Benton printed the order, initialed the freeze confirmation, and walked me through a new set of security credentials. "No texting to numbers not ending in your digits," he said with a small smile. "We'll also flag any request for changes. You will get a call from me directly." He placed a cashier's check across the counter. Funds swept in the last month and returned from the destination account per the injunction. Not the full $6,000 yet, but a meaningful portion. "This amount is to be held for operating expenses," he said. "Please sign the acknowledgement." I signed, then slid the receipt into a sleeve in my notebook and wrote beneath it, "First return, ordinary course only." By late afternoon, Ms. Daniels and I stood on the sidewalk outside my bakery. The sky had cleared to a color I can only call relief. The front glass held my name again, not the glossed initials that had tried to replace it. Through the window, I could see the familiar geography. Ovens, mixer, the chalkboard with half a week's specials, still ghosted in faint words. The locksmith stepped back from the handle and nodded. "Back to the original hardware," he said. "Documented." He handed me 2 keys. They had the old weight. I closed my fingers around them and felt some bone-deep part of me answer. I did not rush. I opened my spiral notebook on the hood of my car like it was the counter at closing. "Re-entry procedure," I wrote. "Photograph storefront and locks. Walk through with witness. Identify perishables. Dispose with log. Inventory dry goods. Check ovens. Verify thermostats. Power sequence. Hood, ovens, warmers. Initial cash count set to 0. Staff notice. Return tomorrow at 6. Ms. Daniels smiled. "A ledger even for breathing," she said. "Good." We took photographs. Front door, lock cylinder, inside latch. I unlocked the door. The bell chimed with the small, bright sound that had greeted so many ordinary mornings. The air inside was stale with a sweetness that had nowhere to go. I walked the line like a captain returned to a ship after storm. Ovens off, pilot lights true, mixers clean, the crumb tray catching a single burnt sugar crystal that glittered in the last of the light. I opened the cooler, logged each carton of eggs by date, pressed a finger to the butter, and wrote, "Still good." I threw out what I could not save and kept a list for the judge. Disposed perishable cream, 3 quarts. Whipped cream, 2 pints. Documented. On the office desk, propped against the register, I found my old tin, moved, but there. The masking tape label, "Seed Money," had been peeled up at one corner and pressed back down by a hand that did not respect tape. I opened it. Each envelope sat where I had left it, but an extra sheet lay on top, a vision plan in Monique's handwriting, all flourish and certainty. At the bottom, Step 4, rebrand for Mom's own good. I set the page aside and placed my mother's ring on the tin while I wrote a new label. Evidence. Do not discard. I posted a simple notice on our door under the court order. By order of the court, Lorraine's Hearth is operating under original ownership. We reopen Tuesday at 7. Thank you for your patience and your prayers. No flourish, no triumph, just the facts. I sent a staff text from my own number. Back on Tuesday at 6 for prep. Same par sheet, bring aprons. Replies lit up. Praise hands, hearts, a simple, "Yes, Ms. Lorraine." That night I carried home flour on my cuffs and the slight ache of muscle that meant work had happened even if no dough rose yet. In my kitchen, I placed the velvet box on my spiral notebook and brewed tea. The quiet was a living thing. I allowed myself to cry without hiding it from myself, not a keening grief, but the kind of tears that come when you put down a weight and see the mark it left in your palm. I whispered my thanks. To paper, to rules that held, to the stubborn little habits that had made a record of me. The next day, Ms. Daniels and I met with a detective from the district attorney's office in a room that smelled of dust and determination. He asked precise questions about Mr. Knox, about who had sent what from which email, about who had custody of the mailbox where the notary once rented a slot. He photographed the forged filings and took statements. "We'll subpoena phone records and device logs," he said. "This may take time." I nodded. "I have time," I said. "I have a bakery to run." On Monday evening, I prepped like it was opening day all over again. I weighed flour by the pound and wrote each number in words in my book. I cracked eggs into stainless bowls and hummed a hymn my mother used to hum when she shelled peas on the back steps. I sharpened pencils. I refolded aprons. I set the cash drawer to zeros and sealed it with blue painter's tape until morning. I placed the returned funds acknowledgement beneath the drawer with a note. Operating expenses only, per injunction. Before bed, I walked room to room and spoke softly the way a person says goodnight to children, or to old rooms that held you when you needed holding. Counter, I said, cooler, mixer, oven. I reached for the velvet box and slipped on my mother's ring, then slid my spiral notebook into my bag with the tenderness you give to a loaf that must not fall. Dawn eased its first pale square onto my kitchen wall. I dressed in my good apron, the navy one with the little stitched heart, and drove in the near-dark down streets that had watched me begin again and again. The sky was the fresh blue of hope that does not announce itself. At 6, my staff gathered on the sidewalk, rubbing hands, greeting quietly, their eyes bright in the way of people who know a day means something. We stood for a breath together. Same par sheet, I said, same love. They nodded. At 6:15, I fit the key into the lock and turned. The bell chimed awake. I walked to the ovens, laid my palm on the metal, and whispered, "Not yet." Power came up in sequence the way it has to, each switch a small consent to heat and labor. We weighed, mixed, folded, proofed. The smell of yeast lifted. Butter melted into air and made it soft. Just before 7, with trays lined like soldiers at attention, and the first pans sliding into the oven with the gentle clatter that means ordinary life is happening, I stepped to the front door to flip the sign from closed to open, and paused, because a figure stood on the sidewalk, hands empty, eyes red, the hem of a soft pink dress lifting in a small, uncertain wind. She stood there in the soft pink dress, the one I had sewn long ago, her hands empty for once. For a moment, I only heard the bakery waking, the hush of the proofer, the low hum of the hood, the first tray settling into heat. Then I unlocked the door and stepped out, my spiral notebook still in my hand like a passport. "Morning," I said. Monique's mouth trembled. "Mama," she whispered, and in that small word I heard a woman whose plan had finally met paper, that would not bend. "I didn't think it would go like this." I nodded. Neither did I. We stood in the light that comes just before a shop opens, that little slice of time where silence still says the most. "You can come in," I said at last, "as my daughter, not as my manager." She looked past me at the ovens and blinked hard. "I'm sorry," she said, quiet, unadorned, no slogan wrapped around it. I did not hand her forgiveness like change over a counter. I put it on layaway where time could pay it down. "There are things we still have to do," I said. "Then we can talk about us." If any of you have ever tried to love someone and protect yourself at the same time, tell me in the comments how you kept the line straight in your hands. By the end of that week, the order was written down in clerk's ink, not just air. The judge signed a preliminary order voiding the assignment filings and directing that all false notarial acts be referred to the district attorney. The notary division sent a letter stamped in blue confirming commission expired, and the DA's office opened an investigation into the filings that bore my wandering middle initial. Baxter and Crowley withdrew the guardianship petition entirely. Ms. Daniels and I filed a civil complaint for conversion and forgery, and then, because we are practical women, we accepted a consent judgment that did what mattered on the ground. Full ownership restored to me. UCC and trade name filings terminated. Wrongfully swept funds repaid over time with interest. Attorneys' fees reserved for the court to decide. The consent judgment required 3 things that made me sleep: any future changes to leases, utilities, bank access, or merchant processors must carry my wet signature and a recorded callback to the number on file. No keys cut without written approval. No managing member listed anywhere near my name without a court order. The court retained jurisdiction to enforce. Paper as a door that shuts and stays shut. There were other reckonings that did not taste like cake. The operations director resigned by email, citing brand misalignment. The landlord signed an amended clause that forces a callback to the original signatory for any change. Mr. Henley initialed each page like a penitent. The bank added a branch note to my profile. Speak with Ms. Jacobs directly. And Mr. Benton walked me through a new token that lives on a fob, not a phone, that blinks when I approve a transfer. The point-of-sale company reset ownership with the original EIN letter and a selfie taken in the branch lobby with today's newspaper held up like proof of life. 2-factor authentication now points to a landline that sits on my office wall and rings loud as a church bell. The registrar placed a red flag on my file. Any filings containing my name trigger a staff review and a callback. Adult Protective Services closed my case, adding a line I underlined in my notebook. Client demonstrates capacity and appropriate protective decision-making. At church, Sister Elaine took my hand and did not let go. I was wrong to trust the sugar in those words, she said, and I knew she meant the phrase that had followed me like a shadow. I stood at the benediction and reclaimed it out loud. Quiet, steady, mine now. I will do what is for my own good, I said. For my own good meant ledgers kept like psalms, signatures guarded like heirlooms, locks that fit only the hands that paid for the door. It meant loving my daughter without letting her write my name. We reopened on a Tuesday at 7 as promised. I wrote a menu in chalk so crisp the letters felt like fresh linen. Sweet potato rolls, pecan chess pie, lemon pound slices, red velvet by the square. I kept a small sign by the register that read, "If you ever need help with paperwork, ask me. Bring your tin of receipts. We'll make a ledger." On Thursdays after close, I started holding evening proof, a quiet hour at the back table where elders brought shoe boxes and questions. We photocopied IDs, set up proper 2-factor, listed which bills should never move to an unfamiliar consolidation, and wrote down call back number in pen that does not smudge. I did not call it a clinic. I called it what it was. Neighbors teaching neighbors to be hard to erase. Monique came by twice a week at first, once to apologize and once to test the old hooks. "Mama, just let me handle social," the voice that used to sound like help. I held my line. "You can order a coffee, you can slice a pie, you can hug me," I said. "You cannot touch the cash drawer, the keys, or the settings." Ms. Daniels drafted a simple family agreement, not court-filed, just notarized by a woman whose stamp glinted new and true, stating the boundaries we would keep. Monique signed without flourish. I signed with a hand that did not tremble. Some days we talked about recipes, not filings. Some days we said very little. I learned that love can be quiet as a locked drawer and just as protective. The district attorney's investigation kept to its own clock. Months later, an assistant DA called to say a plea had been entered on notarial misconduct and filing a false instrument. Not a courtroom drama, just a paragraph in the public record and a fine that went to a fund I will never see. It was not triumph. It was a small, right thing done in the right column. I wrote the case number in my notebook and closed it without underlining. Not every justice needs a trumpet. Work, meanwhile, stayed honest. I posted monthly sales tax with copies stamped and filed. I reconciled deposits daily and initialed each line. I kept a log of keys, 2 in the safe, 1 in my pocket, no, just for now, copies. The bank sweeps remained off, the merchant batches settled straight to the right account, and every Friday I sat at the back table, sipped tea, and put my initials beside entries like a woman blessing her own house. A young baker asked why I still used a tin. "Because paper testifies," I said, rubbing my mother's ring, "and because sometimes clouds vanish." If you've walked this far with me, through betrayal, discovery, documentation, confrontation, justice, thank you. Like and subscribe if you want more of these stories, but also leave a note for the next Lorraine who wanders in here late at night, after the close, scared and mad and looking for a hinge to push. Say what worked. Say where you almost quit and what kept your hand steady on the pen. I did forgive my daughter, though forgiveness here is not a key handed over. It is a seat saved at a table that has rules. On her birthday, we boxed a lemon pound sliced just so and tied it with bakery string. She stood in the doorway, eyes wet, and said nothing grand. That was enough. Later, she asked if she could volunteer at Evening Proof, not to teach, just to bring coffee and copy papers. I said yes. She listens now to elders tell their names out loud and watches them write those names on lines that do not belong to anyone else. On the day the consent judgment became final, wet ink, clerk stamp, file number written in words, I placed the order on the back office shelf next to a tin that once read, "Seed Money," and now has a second strip of tape. Save name. I opened the velvet box, slid my mother's ring off, polished it with the corner of a dish towel, and put it back as if placing a story where it can rest. Then I wrote in my spiral notebook in a hand that would be mine even if the lights went out. Close this chapter. Kept the ovens on. At closing that night, I stood at the front window with the lights low and the city passing by. The bell quiet, the counters wiped down to a shine. I flipped the sign to closed, pressed my palm flat to cool glass, and whispered the phrase that had chased me into a corner until I turned it and made it mine. "For my own good," I said, smiling, "I will keep good books, hold my keys, and open my door each morning to whoever comes honest." Then I heard it, the small, familiar tap at the side entrance where the alley stays kind if you bring it bread. I lifted the latch and let the last customer in, a nurse, still in scrubs, asking if there was one more sweet potato roll. "There is," I said, reaching for the parchment bag as the bell at the front door stirred again and rang bright in the quiet like a promise that keeps arriving.